everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dennis Nassar Baptista. I'm a musician, composer, and one of the founders of New Music Paths, which is a project that showcases musicians, artists, and composers, and as well focus on supporting the music community through events like this one. And that's why after the panel, I would appreciate if you guys could visit our YouTube channel, New Music Paths, and subscribe. This is a simple way of supporting the project, and I'm sure you're gonna have fun discovering new music. So today we'll be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the music industry, and I'm honored to have three amazing guests with me today. Robert Oxoby, professor and head of the Department of Economics and the Associate Dean for the Faculty of Arts at the University of Calgary. Johnny Summers, a multi-talented musician, composer, and arranger who has won multiple awards and also directs the Calgary Jazz Orchestra. And Spencer Cheyne, a Juno Award-winning mixer, producer, engineer, and musician. Welcome, Spencer, and thank you. Okay, so let's get started. So we all know that the music industry has been hit hard this year, and it represents a good chunk of our economy, right? Billions of dollars. And so what is happening with our economy? Like, and what to expect from it as we move forward? I'm not sure I know what a recovery looks like. So Robert, would like to start with this one?
Sure. I think there's a lot of uncertainty of what the recovery is going to look like, and it's not clear. And the recovery, there are two. There's the economy recovery, which is how people getting back to work, incomes going up, consumer spending getting under control or going up, and consumer debt getting under control, and all those things that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. But there's also kind of the less tangible things in the economy, like the effect of the healthcare system and all those things. And if you kind of back all that up, I mean, as someone who used to play before and someone who teaches at a university now, I don't know, a year from now, do you have 400-person courses? Do you have, a packed night in the basement of the Palomino again? I mean, those are the type of questions that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that depends a lot on kind of the health innovation stuff that comes around. So germane to music, the next year is probably going to be pretty lean times, especially for performing musicians. And I'm sure you guys can speak to that as well. So
I'm mostly interested in hearing what you have to say about the economy of Canada, because from what you say, it allows me to surmise essentially about my career and all the people that I hire and all the people that I work with, how and all of the people who are doing similar things to me as a performing musician for a vocation, how that affects our livelihood and our interest. I know, speaking from a personal stance, I've worked at a somewhat above average pace for the last couple decades, since halfway through my time as a student at the university. So the majority of what I do is, 90% of it is performing, and I do some teaching. But for me personally, I needed to learn how to balance. So this has been a time of rest and recuperation. And I had some students that I've been teaching online through this. And I said to them, this is just a time to get better. For me, it meant a time to rest. And for them, I said, this is a time to hone your skills, practice as hard as you can, so that when things start to reopen, we had a little bit of that. So we saw what that will kind of look like for us, which is small venues, not, yes, we're doing shows, but those aren't shows that, we need 400 or 500 people type shows to make a living.
No.
So it's we're getting to explore our crafts with players again, because that's a different side of our skill set. But it's been interesting to see kind of what that would look like. But really, until there's a vaccine and until there's just widespread acceptance that we're all going to be out in droves to see concerts, then I think we're biding our time and waiting. And so it's, and then to the other musicians that I work with and such, and for myself now at this point, it's what do I want the next part of my career to look like? And for musicians now, it's always been, there are two types of musicians. There's the two groups that are easy to look at, I should say. One is the artist, and then the other is the jobbing musician. So the artist is someone who's creating something, who's creating a project, who's creating some kind of a recording project or a vibe or a brand. I hate using that word, but it's true, or a sound. And then the musicians that are skilled to play in that style or to play in multiple styles and have multiple skill sets, so that they have more opportunities to work. Those musicians will go back to work right away when we start getting opportunity. And so depending on which group we want to be in, I think for musicians now, it's time to obviously take care of the day-to-day and the bills, but in any way that they need to, but to use this time to hone their skills or to develop their artistry in both sides of that, depending on where they want to look for work when it appears. But of course, mine is a very on the ground look at things, not this is what Canada's economy will look like. So well, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, that's but the interest, I actually see there's an economic, there's the economy, what we think about, but then it's really the day-to-day stuff of when are clubs going to be open, for performers. And I think what I think, working musicians have always had to hustle, right? You've always had, you're doing multiple gigs, you're honing your skills all the time. You're taking, pick up gigs where you can. This has forced even more of that thing. And, that now there's even, I have mixed feelings about the move to online performances as to what that gives us. But I think musicians now have had to develop a whole other set of skills that have allowed them to pivot during this time. Be that being focusing on their composition, focusing on recording, I know musicians who have gotten more involved instead of kind of large scale pieces. They've started writing a lot of short, small pieces for beginning musicians, for community orchestras, and selling works that way. So I think just the necessity, COVID has forced everybody in the labor market and not in the labor market to pivot in some way. And I think the effect, on the gig economy has been particularly profound. I mean, it's been a very big effect. The musicians are in that economy all the time. And so, kind of the regular gigging musicians are out there have suffered. And then even the professional, say the orchestral musicians or, kind of recording, I have friends who's a bass player who just plays on movie soundtracks, and his work has dried up considerably as well. So he's pivoted to doing other things. So I think that, like you said, until there's a vaccine, but even, there is, until there's widespread acceptance of the vaccine or some fundamental behavioral changes, maybe we will see shows where everyone's wearing a mask. That's what needs to happen to kind of revive the artists, the music economy, so to speak. So, Sorry, Spencer.
I actually have a question. Sorry, Spencer, were you going to say something?
No, that's fine. No, go for it.
Okay. I have a question for all three of you, because this is something I've been curious about, and it's something we've seen throughout history. Even if we look at television, we're kind of in a renaissance of television, where we have great writing, great acting, great direction, not for everything, but for a lot of them. And I'm wondering, and I'm hopeful that almost this withdrawal from community engagement and real visceral experience, like that, being there, seeing it, not just, I'm an autosport fan, and I remember once talking to a young driver talking about how he's driven the Nürburgring in Germany 1 million times, and all his experience on it. And as someone who loves that kind of thing, I said, I expressed, I said, I'd love to go to the Nürburgring. And I've almost gone a few times on some driving pilgrimages and racing pilgrimages in Germany. But so I wanted to go and experience it. And he said, oh, it's great. And he started talking about all the turns and stuff. And I said, man, did you live in Germany? Or do you just go every year? He goes, oh, I've never been to Germany. And he was talking about watching it on YouTube, watching other people's driving on YouTube and playing simulation like racing games, which of course is an experience, but it's not the same as sitting in a concert hall, sitting in a car, and being on the track in control. There's nothing like that, and we know that. And so I'm wondering if we see this renaissance, this resurgence of a desire to. I know personally, I miss going to live concerts, but I'm actually craving theater. I want to go to Theater Calgary so bad. That's me personally. Yeah, like I want to see a play. I want to see actors on stage delivering lines, making me cry, making me laugh. And I definitely want to see concerts. I want the experience of performing concerts. But I wonder if our culture that's been pulling away from the need to pay for music, that our culture expects all music, recorded music, to be free, and don't generally think in Canada and even across North America to necessarily, what would you do tonight? What would you like to do tonight? Well, let's see if there's any great music. Isn't usually the top. It's a movie, go to dinner, go for drinks, something like that. So I'm wondering if there will be a resurgence, or if we'll just, our culture will just fly back. And I'm curious what your thoughts might be on that.
I do think part of that is also that the shared human experience, and that's one thing you don't get watching stuff online. And part of being at a concert is the energy you feel from the other people in the room, and sharing this experience with them. You're like, oh, this is so great. Yeah, this is so great. And I think people are really missing and craving that human connection, whether it's a music concert or a theater or whatever, that shared experience. So I think you might be right. I think there will be a bit of a resurgence because people, we're social creatures. We miss that social aspect. So once it's safe, or, everything's back to more or less normal, I do think there will probably be an uptick in live performance. I mean, I even saw it with, I play with a country artist named Brett Kissel, and we did a bunch of drive-in shows this past summer. We did 24 of them. And it was crazy to me how many people would, pay whatever the ticket price was. Some of them were like $180 for a car to go watch a show in a car where there's not even a PA, but just because they were craving that concert experience so badly. So that really shows you, and like everyone was sold out. It was crazy. So I think people really do want that and want that to come back, but it'll just be when, they feel safe, or when.
Well, and see, I was watching you guys when you were doing that, and I thought it was brilliant. And I know James Bundy, our friend, did an incredible amount of work to make that work well. Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is, yes, live shows will come back. Yes, it will be pretty much like it was before. What I'm wondering is if we will experience a renaissance where our culture more of our culture will desire to consume more live music. So instead of having X amount of shows from small clubs, medium-sized clubs, large events, as far as private events or company parties and weddings, and private concerts, which is, as Spencer and I and Rob, as you know, that's a huge part of a musician's income, is the private shows, to the large scale concerts. Will those multiply? Will we see 10% more, 50% more, 200% more? Because it was all yanked away. Like, when you take something away and you say you can't have this, and then suddenly will the culture crave it more, or will it go back to where it was? That I'm really curious to see what will happen.
I think one of the interesting things that's, happened is because I think you're right. I think that because people have lost this, the people who are true music fans are going to want to go out. And in fact, I would argue that they'll probably be willing to pay a premium to go out and enjoy music in a safe space, whatever that means. And what I think that means is lots of small concert venues. You can, well, not now, but 5 years ago, I played in New York, and we walked down the street, and every other club had something going, and people would go in and out of different clubs. I think that type of environment can come back. And I think because there's size restrictions and things, I think the first places we'll see music come up will be smaller venues, just by restriction, just by, safety standards. And smaller venues, they're more intimate gatherings. That's where you can really touch people and move people in those type of things. And that's where I think that's how that resurgence will come about, when people really experience those first few shows. they're going to be pretty sweet, you know? And so, and most, you know, I'm sure you guys are all the same, you know, I'm doing a lot of practicing now that I've got all this free time, you know,
yeah.
everyone's chops are going to be pretty good when they step on for that first small gig. Those are going to be pretty momentous shows. And my hope is that really, for musicians and for, you know, consumers of live music, you know, participants really, that they'll be much more, you know, those first shows will really set, you know, we haven't had a drink in a long time, and those will be very satisfying. I think that's really where we'll, you know, I expect that we'll see some sort of uptick at the beginning there. You know, the question is, and this becomes kind of incumbent on musicians and really the jurisdictions, is to make sure that that's sustainable, right? That means, you know, you have to have some sort of, you know, maybe you allow smaller venues, you know, to have more shows, you know, to have small shows in boutique galleries and things like that. So, I mean, there's always, you know, there's things the city, the province can do to move things along as well. So,
yeah, well, I definitely hope that's for sure. I really hope for that renaissance, and I'm also craving for, you know, a live show and interacting with musicians and playing live, and playing not necessarily behind the plexiglass. You know, like it was so an interesting experience playing behind a huge plexiglass. Like I felt like a fish in an aquarium. People like watching, you know, like you're behind the plexiglass playing. But definitely, one thing that I also think is with all these people trying to perform things online, and of course, a lot of musicians are not even close to be prepared for doing such a thing. So the quality was bad. You know, and people would, especially if I want to see a specific artist and now he's performing online on that webcam computer, and like, you know, horrible sound, and in me at least, it created like this urge for, oh, I can't wait to see this, you know, live again, this artist, because it's just horrible online, right? So maybe that's one effect as well, that at least with me, you know, that because online is still trying to, you know, catch up. Of course, now we have like better technology. People are, you know, figure things out, getting better cameras, buying better mics, and because they realize that if we have to go a few months still, like I better have like a better equipment so I can do a better performance. And just had 2 weeks ago my first online concert. Was surprisingly well, because I had like a good, you know, condenser mic and mic in my piano. I had like a good camera, so they could actually watch in the theater. It was a private concert, so people were all sitting and watching the big screen, and they said the sound was great. And of course, the comments afterwards, like, it was great seeing you and hearing you well, but I can't wait to actually have you here. Yeah. So it was good to hear that as well. I was glad to hear that it went well. And I was even happier to hear that they're hoping to have me there in person again. So I think that's kind of comforting, right? Do you guys think, another question here, do you think that this awareness of the online world, it's a permanent change in the music industry? And what is the impact of that? What do you guys think?
I don't know. I mean, I think there are two things. I had this composition teacher who used to say there are two things you can't get away from as a musician or as a composer. One of them is people's psychology. Humans look for patterns, and that's why, you know, cadences are cadences, because there's a psychological. And the other thing you can't get away from is the physics of the overtone series. And what's interesting to me about those two things is, you know, the psychology is something we can sit there and we can participate with online to some extent. You know, I mean, I watched Jamie Saft, a New York piano player, 2 weeks ago online, and it was good, but it wasn't the same, because you don't have the psychology's there. You know, I'm engaged with what he's doing, but the physics aren't there. I mean, you know, if you're in a good theater you know, and you feel those low notes on the piano, you feel the drums, you feel the bass, you know, those sound waves have a physical effect on you. And that's what I think people forget. And that's what attracts people to live music. But the online world, I think, so to use the university as an example, when the first lockdown happened, everyone switched to online. And I didn't know how to give an online lecture before that. And you learn and you kind of scrape together. And yeah, you get a better video camera, and yeah, you get some better technology, but that doesn't really help the content that much. I mean, it helps the presentation. And I think what, you know, maybe the online world is here to stay. I mean, certainly is in education. It certainly is to some extent in music performance. But the thing is, like, what's the thing that musicians can bring? You know, what is the next thing that we can do in the online world? And there's, I don't know if you get, what is it? Johnny probably knows, Attali, the music philosopher, who says that, you know, music is so easy to change in some sense, but individually, that's where the cutting edge is. It's always in music, and the arts is where, you know, the new technology will be, the new flows, the new, you know, everything comes out of the arts. And so it's interesting now to kind of, if we take, you know, if the online world is here to stay for musicians, which I think it is, it's time to think, like, what is it that we do in an online world that makes it more for people, makes it more interesting, that allows you to experience the full thing, or at least more of what you experience in a live concert. I mean, I think we've fallen on just thinking about our eyes and our ears when we look at the online world and music delivery, but really there's a physical response too. There's all that stuff. And how do you bring that into the online domain now that we're here? You know, I mean, the mask bylaw is around until December 31st, 2021. So it's going to be a while before there's, you know, before the theaters are being sold out for concerts. So
yeah, man, you brought up a lot of good points. I think of I'll speak through some of my own experiences, because it's I think it's easiest for me to tell a story from that. You know, when we're talking about the online versus the visceral experience of experiencing, right? There's nothing, you know, Spencer, talking about people, even though they're in a car listening to the concert on the radio, seeing the band on a stage, is preferable to nothing. And it's preferable to, you know, being in their home watching it. I think what we're going to see is, and what Dennis, what you talked about, people having that experience now, buying better cameras, musicians getting better equipped to do this kind of a thing from their house. The technology's there, and it's been there for a long time. You know, we haven't really embraced it until it was a defined necessity for human interaction with friends, with family. I would have, and you guys might laugh at this too, I would have never, ever, I mean, I would FaceTime my nieces and nephews. I never, like, literally traveling around the world, I have never FaceTimed my buddies. Okay, so my buddies and I are having coffee and having chats like this, you know, just going, hey man, you want to hang? And the very first guy who said that to me, I went, what is going on? And he was a musician friend. And I'm like, right? You're like, this is creepy, man. Don't make me do this. Don't make me do that. And then I'm all right. That was cool. And now I'm having FaceTime video chats all the time with friends around the world and from the city, because of, you know, and so I don't feel isolated because of that goodness. Now, so I think technology has changed in the sense that will stay, but exactly, I think, Robert, what you're talking about is right now we really need it, and then the technology experience is going to stay, but it will simmer and it will be what's needed. I know I've actually realized, and we've actually meant to do it a bunch of times. So at the beginning of doing a live stream, properly, now Spencer knows I have the bane of perfectionism, because we've worked together for a long time. And especially when we're mixing and I'm producing and he's mixing, I know he's always accommodating and easygoing about it. Thank you, Spencer. And I'm like, nope, that one little thing nobody else will care about needs to be adjusted. But we did one little live stream right at the beginning of the lockdown, just me and my piano player in my studio here, and the sound was frustrating. And so I went, no, I don't like it. I didn't like the way it presented, the way it sounded, like you're talking about, Dennis. And I haven't really approached it much since. But because I released a record that Spencer mixed right at the beginning of April, you know, right when the lockdown occurred, and all the tours, all the concerts, everything was canned, I wanted to do a live stream, and I probably still will at this point, because like you said, Robert, we're a year out still from really getting back to normal, and I'm just accepting that. So I think things like that you might start to see from artists. One of my heroes, whom I've had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with, from learning a lot from seeing in concert many times on his own and with his big band and being in rehearsals with his big band, is Wynton Marsalis. I think he's a genius on multiple levels, musically and intellectually. And he started to do Monday night Zoom things. Hey, just come hang out with me. And he'd chat about subjects, and he'd have guests. And tens of thousands of people are watching that, and hundreds of thousands of people are watching the videos after the fact, because it was access to a human being that many look up to and many love, and many are inspired by, and who is very altruistic and very kind and genuine and intelligent and has a lot to offer. So, you know, to have that access, we're seeing we're reaping the rewards of that, essentially. And I've been watching, although I've been to so many live concerts, and I usually go to New York once or twice a year. If I'm here at home in Calgary, then, you know, they live stream in HD with multiple camera angles all the time for free. They could charge and maybe should charge, but their idea is more altruistic, more evangelistic with music. So, and I've watched just tons of those shows, many times, especially after. And I did get I watched him play at the Village Vanguard with Bill Charlap, a piano player I love, just a few weeks ago, and bought tickets and watched both nights, bought tickets for both nights. It was amazing. And we put it on the TV and had great sound and had snacks and enjoyed a concert experience in our room. So I think that'll stay to some degree. But at the same time, I've never performed at the Village Vanguard. I'd love to one day, but I've been on stage on the seats right next to it with Christian McBride's trio. I mean, I've been there many times for shows, but with Christian McBride's trio, Christian was like, he's my favorite bass player, one of my favorite in the world. And he was 2 feet away from me. And I could feel the percussiveness coming off of his instrument and the energy with his trio, because I'm so close, I could have been in the band. And I was just on fire with their energy. And I still, remembering it, it lights me to practice, to play, to perform. Just the memory of that lights a fire under me. And that is impossible to replicate online. So I think we're going to see a lot of the online things be a necessity or stay. The only thing that I can say, sorry for the long-winded rant, the only thing I can say coming back to it is the monetization of music for the continuation of our profession is mandatory. This isn't even like people getting rich. This is people existing. And again, our culture has decided that music should be free. And so we're in this really weird thing that if you do a live stream, if I do a live stream, I pay my musicians. I may pay a live stream person to run a camera and a sound man. And then I may invest in, like you're saying, we're going to get better gear. We're going to get better cameras. We're going to get better blah, blah, blah. So we can put on a better presentation. And then you can maybe ask for tips. Like that's, it's out of skew. You know, a record, as Spencer knows, can be $10,000 to $50,000 to make a recording so that you can give it away for free for people to listen to on Spotify or wherever they stream. You know, these are things that are broken. So, and I've seen people trying to charge ticket prices online and not being able to sell a $10 or $20 or $40 live experience online. So we're in a weird thing where our culture doesn't necessarily, they want it. And the stats are saying that more music, in jazz specifically, more people are consuming jazz music, just because that's something I've studied a lot in the marketing side, now than in the history of the world. That's fascinating. But they're doing it in a way that is not monetizing to the musicians. And I'm sure that is across all music. So it's, there's a disconnect in keeping it sustainable and not just turning into a hobby where people work 40 hours and then they play a bit, as opposed to where they constantly, every day, their entire focus is honing their craft to be the absolute best they can be, so they can really present an incredible show that blows people away and makes them feel something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a challenge. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dennis.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I would just get this. That's the challenge. I mean, in the end, is how does this, in the end, get monetized in a meaningful way, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm too old to do a $100 gig anymore. So I'm too old to go play the blues can for $100. Like, I can't do it anymore. But I think the hope that musicians should have, and this is now, it becomes incumbent on musicians to start thinking this way, is how do I engage? There are people out there who love music. Everyone who's probably watching this misses live shows. All of us here on the panel miss live shows. We can't wait to go back. We're not, what musicians need to do is, how do you engage the other people? Other people who are consumers of music, but not in the same way. And you want, basically, I think, for a lot of those people, they haven't been able to have that visceral reaction. I mean, just like Johnny was talking about Christian McBride, mine is, I saw Jamie Saff live once at the Stone, and I physically held my seat to stop myself from standing up and dancing. It was so contagious. And it was a jazz trio, a piano trio. It was the most infectious feeling. And I think about that, and I can feel it in my hands and in my bones. It's electric. That's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's in the small coffee shop where you can really make the connection and things like that. I think
you're right.
Yeah.
But if we're in the small coffee shop, the musicians can't get paid because, like you mentioned, you're too old to play for $100 at the blues game.
Yeah.
And the crisis we're in, we were in this before the lockdown, is, and you mentioned walking down the street, like in the village in New York, where Smalls and all these clubs are. Well, if people are playing for $30, $50, $100, and they're living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and they're fighting and bribing to get those gigs, and they're spending time and resources and materials on marketing themselves to get $100 gig, they have to do something else for their vocation, like for their.
Well, this is where I think, though, we're all going to have these cameras after this is all done. And I think what, the musicians or the people who love live music like we do, will go to shows. We'll be at those shows, whether they're small coffee shops or whatever. But there are other people out there, and I'm sure we've all done this, that we've all bought a ticket to a concert that we're kind of interested in. And then 2 months later, when that date rolls out, you're like, oh man, I forgot about this. You don't, but I think there'll be consumers like that who will love to live stream. And there will be consumers who will like to, download that copy of that recording. And I think now that we have all this familiarity with this equipment that, I didn't understand before, now, whenever I gig my trio gigs next, we'll probably have some Zoom cameras set up so we can record it, and then we can live stream it with some friends to do, so I think there's a way to start, segmenting. The economist in me is, there's a way to segment the market to bring music to more people in this world now. And I think, what Johnny said is exactly right. Music listening, music consumption is at an all-time high across the world. And we have, once we get past this and we start moving towards, maybe maybe your trio all of a sudden becomes a quartet because there's bass, pianos, drums, and a videographer who manages the live stream and then edits and puts that out. I think that's how we have to think about monetizing it, is really identifying, those people who really like music, but maybe haven't had this strong connection yet. And the way we'll do that, they won't pay $30 to come see a coffee shop gig, but they may pay $10 to live stream it. And they may pay $5 on Bandcamp to download the recording afterwards. I think that's, we're we're creative, musicians are creative people. We got to be able to come up with a solution out of this. So.
Yeah, I really hope we know the industry finds a solution for the streaming part of it. Because of course, while people are buying your album or tracks on iTunes, and that's good because they are buying it, right? They're buying your album, they're buying the tracks, but it's really, and find a word for this, but frustrating, hurting.
Well, what do you get?
That where you like get 1,000 streams and get like $4 or say what?
Like, Johnny probably knows it better. You guys probably know it better than I do, but I have a friend who plays in a very popular metal band that his last check from Spotify, I think, was $9. For millions of listens.
And that's it. Let's talk about that. So I see so many, Spencer, I know you see this, so many, especially because you work with so many artists that are putting out material as an engineer. So they all triumphantly, and I've been frustrated with this and curious with this. The neat part is we can see the metrics about how much our music is consumed in a way we never have. We have that technology. But Spotify specifically, nobody's buying on iTunes, let's be honest. Bandcamp, almost nobody, unless they get it, are buying on Bandcamp. I do still sell a fair amount of CDs. Most of them are from through the record label that I'm on, Cellar Music. But out of Vancouver, run by Corey Weeds, he's awesome. And he's great for music and for the industry. But so we'll still move, like the CDs, especially if we're playing somewhere, which of course we're not now, because of we'll sign them for people. But Spotify specifically, if like I have one record that was over, upwards around over $50,000 to make, because it was a 20-piece jazz orchestra and a 35-voice choir, and it was a 60-minute piece of music that I wrote. That was one of the most exhaustive things I'd ever done, to write it, arrange it, premiere it, restructure it, rehearse the choir, rehearse the band for about a year, then to record it. And Spencer engineered it and mixed it. And so that was a lot of work. And so that gets a spin, and that gets monetized on something like Spotify. Even if you put a $5,000 into a record, to get it back from Spotify is impossible. And so we see all these artists that go, look at my Spotify numbers, my year in review, look, I've got 1 million spins. And so I look at mine, and I don't even want to say my numbers. They're good numbers. And I don't want to say them because if I think of it as radio, and then you're like, oh, okay, it's radio. I got X amount of spins, and that's a significant amount of spins. And but if I think of it as radio and I got X amount of spins, I get a fraction amount of that spins on radio. And so I actually get a check that's way higher than what Spotify pays. So again, the monetization is right out of whack. And people that pay for a Spotify or an Apple Music does pay higher, but still, when they pay for those things, they think that it's going to the musicians. It's generally the massive catalog. So like the industry that has created this 100 years of recorded music that we all still listen to and love. Those companies have a ton of weight. They have millions of songs that they can approach Spotify with. And so they can almost say, this is what we want to make. And those payouts are a lot higher to those companies, which used to be an industry because records would sell, and now is a management business where they're managing existing catalog and not making new material, not near that they were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the digits. So that again is where musicians they do all this work and then they give it away for free. I've talked to musicians about this in the past, and I've thought of doing this, and I think this is what I'll be doing coming up here, but I haven't 100%, is that if I put out a record, I'll put a track or two on Spotify, on Apple Music. Yeah. So you use it as a marketing tool. But if you like that music, you have to go to my website or Bandcamp or wherever you sell and buy it and buy in. And then we can have a conversation. And then those are the hardcore dedicated fans.
Yeah. But I think isn't that what Zadok Records does? John Zorn's label?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit on there's teasers on Spotify, but the albums, you go to the Zadig website and you can either buy them electronically or you can buy physical copies of them. So
that makes sense.
but I think it's a real challenge, and it's a cultural thing, you know, kind of, and you know, and the truth is, when times get lean in writ large lean, like economic slowdowns, the arts are always the first place that takes the hit. And as a result, you know, they tend to be, at least when we think about kind of institutionalized arts programs like music in schools, they tend to be the slowest then to come back as well. And so that's that's why I think there have to be ways to make it work. You know, maybe it's the live show with live stream and subsequent recording, and maybe that changes, you know, the dynamic, and maybe that attracts, you know, is set out to more people, something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's, you know, there has to be a way, because otherwise, you know, those visceral concert experiences will be even fewer and farther between than they are now, or than they were before this.
Yeah, I personally really like that strategy, Johnny, of using Spotify more as a marketing tool, and actually, if you want to buy my albums, go to my website. And I think that's great, personally. I think that's at least that's one solution, one way of maybe that I can see we're moving forward and making the albums that we record, the music that we compose, like value a little bit, right? It's not just being like worthless. That's how we feel. And I think now with musicians being at home and not being able to do live concerts and all that, I think that side of the industry, I think, was highlighted. What do you think? Like, I think it was always there, but I was playing lots of gigs, making my income and etc. Now that I can't do that. Now I'm left with my streamings and selling my albums online, selling merch. And then that's why I think when we actually became maybe even more aware that something needs to change. Do you think that COVID maybe brought more awareness of that ugly side of the industry?
I feel like in some ways we're kind of reverting back to maybe more like 40s and 50s, where the only artists or musicians who were really making a lot of money were the ones who had those major record deals and who had the labels had the control of distribution and who got to record, because it was just physically too expensive for most people to record. And then, in the, I guess, probably more like the 90s, 2000s, it became affordable for, a person, let's say the weekend hobbyist musician, even to make a record, or not even the hobbyist, but just someone who is just recording for fun, all the way up to professionals. And it became more accessible to record an album. And so those people started to make, I guess you could also say they didn't make any money because of Napster and stealing music came in then. But I feel like it's almost getting, the middle is being sucked out, where there are still musicians at the top, like the super pop stars of the world. They're still making money and the labels are making money. But it's harder and harder to make a living if you're not a worldwide superstar. And you're kind of being pushed down to the bottom where no one wants to pay for anything, unless you are that Lady Gaga or Coldplay or whatever it may be, Imagine Dragons, any of those super pop stars. Because when you look at their streams, they're still making money. But it's also tough now when there's so much content out there. How do you get noticed? How do you get those streams to actually make that money? Because when, the streams pay fractions of a penny per stream, you need just a ridiculous amount to even make a living. I think that the conversion rate right now, at least from sales, is they're saying 150 streams equals one download in Canada, which is to me a little crazy, because there's hardly any records I own that I've listened to 150 times, yet I still had to pay the $20 for the record if I listen to it once or not. So that I feel like that that payout method might have to change for it to continue before the system collapses on itself. Mm-hmm. Either that, or just the only people who will be able to afford to record are either the super major label acts or people who have another job. And this the musician who was a musician but not necessarily a superstar, it's going to get harder and harder to be that, unless those numbers change, and unless they change that that split. Like, a number to me, just pulling out of thin air, like if it was 25 streams would equal 1 download. I feel like that most people who've bought a record, maybe they listened to it 20 or 25 times, but 150 is pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. I just don't know of that many people who bought a record and listened to it 150 times.
You're right. I think there are a few records I have, and some that I've listened to way more than that, but I've purchased over 4,500 records. Yeah. So I don't think I've listened to them all 150 times.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. And with that too, like, again, there is money. The thing is, if you think about, like, even let's say if everyone in North America, which I don't know the exact population, but for easy number's sake, let's say it's 300 million people are paying for Spotify. That's a lot of money that's going around every year. If it's $10 times 300 million, what's that? That's $3 billion a year. My math is correct. I'm not a mathematician, but $3 billion a year. That's just in streaming, just from one platform. There is money there. I think it's just partly how it's being distributed. And right now, like with radio play and with other forms of, there's legislation and royalties that, like, they have to pay certain amounts. Like if you get played on CBC, you have to get paid a certain amount. And the problem right now is Spotify and these streaming services kind of made up their own streaming numbers or the payouts. Yeah. And part of that too,
and they have very, very expensive lawyers to maintain those low expenditures and to fight those. So that the union in North America has I know gone to bat. Robert, you might know more about this than I do. I know they've gone to bat for it. But to varying degrees of success. But I mean, when you have deep pockets there, and what's his name, Daniel Ek, the Spotify CEO. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And he's telling musicians they need to produce more now. We're in an age where they need to realize that musicians need to produce more. They need to be producing tracks weekly, and they need to. Yeah. And he's at $4.6 billion is his net worth. Like, and you start going, okay, what are you doing for the music industry that you're worth that money? I'm not saying that the music industry shouldn't spend it for you to be the CEO of Spotify, but if it does, what are you doing for the music industry?
I think that's just it. There is money there. It's just not going necessarily to the musician,
which
for
we've
the
seen
content
before.
creators. I mean, even if you think about like companies like Shaw here in Calgary, the internet providers. I realize they have expenses and, getting the wires up in the air. Same thing with all the cell phone companies like Rogers, Bell, whatever. Yes, they have expenses, but once that overhead is paid off, they're charging all this money just to basically transfer data over their wires. So there's money being paid for digital consumption. But like, I think one way you might also combat this is saying, if you have to pay $100 a month for your internet, right now that's all going directly to the internet providers and very little of it to the content providers. And I mean, maybe the internet will continue forever with that model, but I don't know. I just feel like if the content creators never make any of that money, eventually the high quality content is going to dry up at some point.
I mean, wouldn't this be similar to, and I see what you're saying, except for when people are so excited to create content, it seems to continue. It doesn't mean it's always quality, but and then Robert, would this not be similar to something like the landlords always make money, but those businesses that pay the rent and have some creative bakery or some creative mom and pop shop, they feel the squeeze of the taxes and the overhead, and they're the ones creating and adding value.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, the lesson that I hope comes out of this, I mean, there's a lot of lessons, but one of the lessons I hope that comes out of this is that that landlord-tenant relationship, just like a content creator, content consumer relationship, is a lot more complicated than we think it is. You know, for example, I mean, and the example I use is, there were dolphins in the canals of Venice. When everybody, when this pandemic hit, these other things started coming up. And I think we've seen, that the world is very interconnected, and the landlord's fate is tied to the tenant's fate, just, in the same way that the tenant's fate is tied to the landlord's fate. And we've seen that now. I mean, we know that, as businesses have closed, the business is closed, and all of a sudden the property management company or the owners, then they have a problem. And so we see that this is much more connected. My hope of what comes out of this is that we see, at least at the local level, and I think that's where it has to start, let's just use Calgary as an example, or Edmonton, that in the small there, in those things, that's where that sharing or that change has to happen. I mean, music venues have, every musician who has ever played a gig, even if you only played one, you have one bad story about a booker probably, right? But we have to realize that those relationships are interconnected. You can play 100 gigs, you'll still have at least one bad story about a booker, but those are all interconnected. We need to recognize that. And so I think that the rewards from doing those things, I think naturally we need to, just like we need to see landlords and tenants downtown working more closely together to manage space and expectations, I think we need that as well within the music industry. I mean, kind of the expectations, how does money get split, or what are the terms of the agreement? And really, I think, again, because we've been without this for so long, I think there will be a pretty active thirst for this. And I think there is the opportunity there for some entrepreneurial thinking, booker, musician, whatever, to really work with the community, with the musicians, to really, or with the local community of musicians, to really to create something that's really, really is that visceral experience that we get, when we're really excited at a music venue.
Can we maybe quick go around and close this with what is one piece of practical advice that you would give to musicians right now, based on everything we've been talking to and the situation we're facing?
You have to look at different ways. Like the old model, I think, is kind of dying. You have to look at different ways to monetize your career. One way is like something like Patreon, where rather than giving us all your stuff away for free on YouTube and Instagram and all your content, let's say on Spotify, creating unique special content on that only your subscribers, people, I don't know if you know about Patreon, but basically people sign up to be get exclusive content from you. That might be one way, and might be a way of the future, where you maybe have some teaser tracks on Spotify, like the other guys were saying, or you have some content out there, but then if for your really super fans, you have a subscription service where you only get access to it if they're paying you X number of dollars a month. Obviously it's not going to work for everyone, but I feel like that could be a way forward for future musicians to take control of their careers, especially with recordings and that sort of thing. And then just finding other, I guess, unique ways to monetize performances with the live streams and stuff. I'm maybe not the right guy to ask for that, because I'm not doing any of that, but I feel for the artists. It's tough. It's hard out there. But I guess in some ways it's always kind of been hard in the arts to make it. It just makes it more challenging when it's continually changing, so you can't actually figure out how to do it.
Yeah, totally. Johnny, you have any advice?
I guess the entrepreneurial spirit in me says, find something that people really need, and then provide that service. So if you're doing it in music, apply that to yourself and think about that, and how will that work for you? I think what Spencer's mentioning, things like Patreon, are definitely a viable thing that we need to experience and we need to look into. because you're connecting directly with your fan base. You're connecting directly with people who like, appreciate, love, desire, and get something out of what you do. So I think that that's key if we think of it like that. I think that like what Robert's talking about and what we're all feeling is that the more online connection, more chats like this, more impromptu things, more and some artists are really good at this already, but at the same time, doing it all the time doesn't necessarily build you a fan base. It just keeps you very busy and doesn't really develop your career or develop your art, so or your skill set. So if I were, I mean, I've talked to a lot of other musicians and a lot of young musicians about this. First take stock of who you are, where you're at. Have a sane estimate of yourself. Have someone you trust that you can even talk to and say, what are my strengths and weaknesses as a musician, as an artist, as a business person? And then really, because we have this time, I've never really had this time in my life to really spend time and think about the things I wanted to, because like Robert was talking about earlier, if a gig comes up and I want to play it or I want to work, then I take it and then I do the work for that job, as opposed to necessarily. I know I have planned a lot. I've done a lot of big shows and things and projects, and but it's exhausting to do both. And so we have that time right now. So, look at your skill set. What's the one thing that you really want to achieve? And what's the second and what's the third? And do you have the skill sets to do that? As a musician, as an artist, and as a business person, or as a support person, if we're talking about doing video, home recordings, if we're talking about being content creators, or do we have those skill sets? If not, don't get overwhelmed, because it's easy. It was easy in the industry 50 years ago, 20 years ago to get overwhelmed. I think it's more so now, because the skill sets that we need to be successful on a variety of platforms, and like Robert's talking about, maybe the future is, especially as the economy for us as musicians comes back, there won't be large paying big shows for at least a year. And speaking from my experience, it takes me about 12 months to 18 months to plan out future tours. So I was doing work a year and a half ago for stuff that has been canceled, that I'm not doing now. And that's, so, planning for that to hopefully come back or to grow, which I think it will, but to have all these skill sets so you can be online and monetize that. And so you can connect with people and find ways to pay yourself and pay the people you work with, a fair wage, and then eventually a good wage, and hopefully a great wage. But to sit down and plan and think, where do I want to be? What are the skills I need to do that? Have a sane estimate of yourself again on all those skill sets. Am I a good enough musician to perform at the level that I wish to perform? No. Well, maybe I need to study technique, or maybe I need to take some online lessons with someone. And some of the greatest teachers in the world are available right now, because they're not performing and touring, and they love connecting with people who are passionate about what they do. So I think it's that, use the time to get better. And for us in Canada, I know many of my musician friends were in desperate need, and thank goodness we had things like the CERB and the CRB. And I have no idea, Robert, this is your specialty, what this will do to our economy moving forward. I've read a lot from The Economist and from a lot of other places that I try to read, unbiased information. But I know for them directly, it was a lifeline. And my comment to them was, don't think you can sit back and watch Netflix. You need to be shedding your instrument and honing your art. And when artists do incredible amounts of work to present themselves to get a grant, think of this as a grant. Think of this as time that you have where we aren't performing like we were. So practice and hone your skill set, develop your artistry. Think of it as pre-production for albums, for projects, or pre-production for your next phase of your professional life as a musician, and use that as a gift. And then the last tidbit there is, as I've been reading, is the problem with the CRB payments is most people are buying stuff from, Alibaba and Amazon. So the money isn't staying in Canada. So the stimulus, the effect that usually that these kinds of things have, and I really want to hear what you say about this, Robert, because I'm super interested in this, is not having the effect that it would have, has had previously, and that it's supposed to have in our economy in Canada, because the money's leaving and the goods are coming in. And I remember Tommy Banks and I talked about this a lot, which was specifically with the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, because he was one of the founding members, founding forces, I should say, of getting that started. And he said he would talk about, and I forget the numbers, but he would talk about, in a payout period, there'd be 200 grand or 400 grand that would go. And if some of that goes because someone's studying in New York or something, that's fine. But the majority of it pumps up the economy and comes back so multiplied. And I forget the numbers, 4 or 5 times multiplied to generate income in our economy. And we have the added benefit of the cultural benefiting from the arts. So I would say that, I don't know, that's a long-winded answer. I apologize. I get really passionate about this stuff, but and I want to see our culture and in musicians doing well, but that would be it. To use the time, see what you want to do, make a plan, refine your skill sets, learn, grow, and then experiment and try those things on all these great all this great advice that we're hearing from people here. But yeah.
I remember my dissertation advisor and the guy I was taking lessons from essentially gave me the same advice, which is what Johnny just said. I mean, to do good research, you got to keep your ass in your chair. And you just got to keep writing. To become a good bass player, my teacher said you just got to keep that bow on the bow on the string. And if even if you just sit there, eventually you get bored with it, you're going to get better. You have to keep, you have to be resilient and you have to keep trying. The other advice I would give, and I think this is important, especially now, is you also have to cut yourself a break. Like, there's nothing wrong with, taking some downtime and things like that. This has been a very stressful time. And I know a lot of people in the arts who have really been pushing themselves thinking, Shakespeare wrote so many plays during the Black Plague. I should be in that prolific, but you got to cut yourself some slack too. So, yeah. And as for the CERB, I mean, these economic benefits that have been put out, it always depends what the purpose is, right? I mean, CERB was really fundamentally keep people afloat. I don't think we would have liked to have seen more of it stay in the country. It didn't. We'll see what, depending on how long this is. Hopefully we're in the final, the worst is behind us. And so we'll see what it looks like coming forward. So.
That's all great. Thank you so much for those advice, guys. It's very, very valuable. Would you be able to take a quick question from someone?
Sure. You totally made me think of something, Robert, which is 100% true. And right at the very beginning of the lockdown, some of the media people that have been so lovely to me through the years, and some of the interviews I was doing were based on the record that we had just put out called Baker's Dozen. Check it out.
I have a copy of it in the other room. But
do you really? Oh, I'm honored. Well, that makes me happy. That made my day. And it was interesting because I was like, well, what are you creating? Boy, I can't wait to see what you create, and I can't wait to see what all these great artists create. And I'm like, I'm sure some of them are, but the truth is, I was tired. I was completely exhausted, and I've spent since last March. And I know you know what this is like, Robert, but when I was going full bore and I had to write and arrange and direct, and then all the business behind everything, and all the production, and all the keeping up my vocal chops and keeping up my trumpet chops, that was the last place. That was the last thing I had time for or energy for. And still trying to practice when I'm on a plane with a practice mute in, we're still trying to do that. And so I've had dedicated in my studio, in my chair, relaxed, because I don't have to sound good. It can take 4 months to master this next skill set I'm trying to do, or 2 years, it doesn't matter. And I've never felt stronger as a musician, technically, than I do right now. And I've had almost zero desire to create anything, but I needed to get better. I think, and to me that meant as a player, and then I needed to get healthy. I needed to step away. And now I'm starting to get all these creative juices, and I'm getting really interested in music again. And I needed some time off, which is a lesson I need to learn, and I'm terrible at that. But I think you're 100% right. So if musicians aren't creating their next Mona Lisa, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, you know, I mean, I have rediscovered the joys of long tones. In practice, like just to see like how long, like how long can I make a long tone? And it turns out you can, you know, because I don't feel pressured. I'm not rehearsing for a gig. I'm just practicing for the sake of practicing. And you know,
totally.
How slow can you move a bow and still get a sound?
How great is your tone now? I'm sure your tone is probably epic.
Oh yeah, no, it's like super things like that. Like it's like, you know, like the G string sound that I'm getting now. It's that Gary Carr, you know, swarm of bees buzz. It's great. So now I just got to write a piece with all long tones and I'll be set.
that side of Johnny also brought up is very interesting to remember, like going to her place, Johnny, in August, and then asking, hey, how are you doing? You know, and usually we're so used to hearing like, I'm so busy, I'm, you know, for everyone. And it was very nice, you know, when you said, I'm resting after, you know.
Yeah.
And I say it actually was a relief, because it was always like also like taking a break. Say, oh, that's good. And it felt so good. And, I'm sure Johnny can say the same. Like, felt so good, like to recover our energies to actually then later start practicing again and, you know, investing time, and also like for a mental health, I would say, you know, like to take a break and think about things. Oh, thank you so much, guys. I have a question here from Mark Jonah, which is a colleague of mine, the professor at Prairie College, and he's writing here: with the music shows that are presented online, some have a suggested ticket price, some have a set price. Do you feel that people are expecting a cheaper ticket price because it's on our TV in our basement? And how do you not lose the sense of value for your craft?
It's a great freaking question.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, and I think our culture sees it as less. I know even I teach maybe 2 or 3 students at a time historically. I might take on more now because I do enjoy teaching, but it's a lot of time. And one of my students said right when we transitioned, they said, "Oh, is it cheaper because it's online?" And I went, "Well, no, it's the same amount of time for me, and it's even more preparation and more, you know, than." And it's more difficult. But the perception is that, yeah, totally, you're absolutely right. I think the only way to not cheapen it is just don't cheapen it, which is exactly what every single musician does. You know, it's like, oh, but I really want the gig, I'll do it for this amount. Well, I'll do it for this amount. Well, I'll play it for this amount. And it just goes down and down and down. Yeah. Just say no. And at the beginning of I had a very lovely person whose wedding I played a number of years ago with my band. And at the beginning of the lockdown, I think right around when they said 50 people or so were allowed outdoors, distanced, and they were going to have a birthday party. And they said, you know, how much for your quartet to come? And we even had everything, so we didn't even need power. We had everything battery operated and everything. So, and I said, yeah, we'll come, and it's X amount of dollars. And I think it wasn't what they were expecting. I think they were expecting, you know, the $100 a musician thing. I'm like, well, I can't make a living like that. So why would I cheapen what I do? Just because we have more availability, it doesn't mean I'm still interested in doing it for way less. Now, that's not that every musician is I understand that not every musician may be in a stage where they can make that choice. And people have to work, and we need to, but at the same time, I think it's just don't cheapen what you do, and don't sell yourself short, and don't, because the moment you do, because that's what the recording industry did. And the moment we do this, and that's what all musicians have done, what we're talking about online. And the moment you do this, that's the new value, the new perceived value. Yeah. And then you have to fight against that.
And I think to the question that was also asking about kind of how these prices are set, or if people set their own prices, I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between the experience and the memory of the experience. So the example I'll use is many years ago, the band I was in, we put out a CD, we played a show, where we charged whatever the rate we were charging at the time. We played that show, but we had this rule because it was the first gig that we were doing with the CD, that everybody who came to the show had to leave with a CD. And that meant if you didn't like the band, you got a free one. And if you did like the band, we gave you a CD and we said, hey, what do you want to pay for it? And we actually did 2 shows like this. We actually made more money on the selling CDs on the nights that we had people name their own price. Because almost nobody takes one for free. Most people will give you $5, and some of them give you much more than that. And so because that's the thing of kind of engaging them. The hope is that we engaged them enough. They want something to remember it by, and we're going to give them a memento. And hopefully they value it enough to pay us for it. But we've already got, I always viewed CDs as kind of, I never thought that we were going to make money with CDs. So I thought it was the band I was in, that band was never going to make money with CDs. So those were more a memento. But I think it's exactly the thing that musicians do, particularly for live gigs. And I've done it. Probably Johnny has done it sometimes when we were younger, that it's like, well, the gig's $80, and then somebody takes it and you're like, well, Rob will do it for 60. And you kind of, it's this race to the bottom that you get, particularly among younger musicians who are just jonesing the gig. But I think the way you don't cheapen it is just what Johnny says. You just don't cheapen it. You say that this is the love, this is the thing I am delivering is a performance. And that performance has inherent value. And you just have to the thing is that value differs for all sorts of different people, but you have to stand by what you think that value of that is. So you have to be your own best advocate. The rest of the world's job is to be your critic. You have to be your advocate. So. And
there's a bit of what the market will bear in there too, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
If you can garner a $50 ticket, then do it.
Yeah, totally.
But if we do the Costco kind of idea where, I have a friend, a prominent musician in New York, who did a live stream, and they did $10 ticket firm. It's just $10, period. But they had, I think, roughly 12,000 people, buy that $10 ticket. So, he's good now. Yeah. But I also see musicians, friends of mine, several from New York as well, but from around the world, doing the tip jar. Here's my PayPal or Venmo tip jar. And some of them are saying they're making $100 or $200 a night, and they do it once a week. And I know others that are doing better than that, a lot better than that. But so I mean, for every single musician, it's going to be different. It's going to be garnering what you think is going to work, depending on. And if you have a small niche audience, then charge more. The one thing I can say from, I guess this would be our 16th season. But from running the Calgary Jazz Orchestra from its inception and starting it and making a ton of mistakes and learning a bunch was, our original ticket price was $15, and I think now it's $40. But when you have up to 26, sometimes 30 musicians on stage that are all top professionals, and the amount of work that goes into these shows, they're some of the best I've ever been a part of, and I'm amazed at what the musicians do. That the ticket price is still almost too cheap. And that was something that someone with much more experience from Theatre Calgary, who did a lot of work on their board, came to a show and said, your ticket price is way too cheap. You need to start sliding these up over the years, because it will enable you to do so much more, but you're devaluing what you do just to get bums in seats. And we were selling out concerts. So although that feels good, and they were right. They were 100% right. And it's allowed us to pay musicians better, take care of people more, and add more production value to the shows. So I don't know. That's a tough question to answer, but.
Well, I think it's also the thing of, every time you stand by your price, you're not only helping yourself, you're helping the other musicians, right? You're really helping establishing a fair practice of a fair labor market for musicians.
And the ones not just because I have a lot of musicians that I hire that I feel strongly about hiring a huge number of musicians every year. And when I can see the spreadsheet at the end of the year, and I know how much I'm paying each of them, and I'm going, and I'm proud of that. But it's not, you're right. It's not just me and my circle. It's every other musician. The problem is, if this is my price, and then online or otherwise, and then another musician says, well, I just want a gig, and that's their price. you'll get less work because they can get so and so, whether they're better than you or worse than you, it's irrelevant. They can get so and so for X amount of dollars, and so our whole industry, and the union has struggled with this for a lot of years, and I'm a firm believer in the union, but of course, it's a difficult thing to enforce with musicians. So.
Herding cats.
Herding hungry cats.
Yeah.
Well, Johnny and Robert, this has been fantastic. I can't thank you guys enough for sharing your time and expertise, and also it's been great to see you guys, to meet you, Robert, for the first time.
Nice to meet you too. Well, and thank you very much, Dennis, for all your work, and for everyone on the team for putting all this together. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Also, thank you for Myline Productions for helping with all the technical elements. It's not also easy to do all this, and it's been working well, like with the webinar format, and I'm glad for that. So I hope you guys at home have enjoyed too, and don't forget to subscribe to New Music Paths, and bye for now.
What music paths are being explored today? What interesting techniques are being used in composition? Welcome to New Music Paths.